Your audience, ethos and pathos. Logos, ethos, and pathos, as discussed the previous class, are the classical appeals that work together to make the persuasiveness of one's arguments. Logos is the logical structure of reason and evidence in an argument. When a writer concentrates on logos, he or she is often trying to clarify his or her own thinking as much as to persuade. As the claim is developed with reasons and supporting evidence, the writer can then focus on linking his or her own arguments to the assumptions, values, and beliefs of the audience and appeal to ethos and pathos by enhancing the reader's trust in the writer and by engaging the reader's sympathies and imagination. To explain the statement, pathos, ethos, and logos are not substances, rather a way of seeing, I'm going to use a metaphor. So think of the different lights that can be cast upon actors on a stage. Ethos, pathos, and logos are different lamps and filters used on the theater spotlights to vary lighting effects on a stage. If I were to switch on the pathos lamp, I would be using more concrete language or vivid examples. The resulting image with this type of lighting effect will engage the audience's sympathy and emotions more deeply. Then if I were to add an overlay, the ethos filter, by adopting a different tone towards the audience, the projected image of the writer as a person will be slightly altered. Finally, if I were to turn on the logos lamp by adding more data for evidence, it will draw the reader's attention to the logical appeal of the argument. Depending on how the writer regulates the lamps and filters, he or she will shape and color the reader's perceptions of the issue. So now we've talked about it and I provided a metaphor, but let's go and I'll give you a couple examples. So here is how to apply pathos and ethos. Example number 1. People should adopt a vegetarian diet because only through vegetarianism can we prevent the cruelty to animals that results from factory farming. Example number 2. I hope you enjoyed your steak tonight. You know, of course, how much that steer suffered just so you could have a tender, juicy steak. Corporate farming crams cattle into small enclosed pens with concrete slats, and the animals have no way to walk in tall grass or escape other cattle from lashing out and bullying them. Both of these arguments have roughly the same logical core. Their claim is people should adopt a vegetarian diet. The stated reason for them is because only vegetarianism will end the suffering of animals subjected to corporate farming. And the grounds is the evidence of suffering in the corporate farms confinement buildings where cattle are crammed together, and when others lash out and bully an individual steer, that steer can't escape like in an open pasture. The warrant is, if we have an alternative to making animals suffer, we should adopt it. Now, when you look at the two of them, the impact on the reader from each argument varies because the emotional power of argument 2. Argument 1 uses more abstract terms like cruelty to animal, which cruelty could be any number of things. So that's why it's abstract. It's not real specific. Whereas argument 2 paints a very vivid picture of cattle lashing out or bullying another steer who can't escape the harassment. So here we can start picturing or get a mental image of animals, just like people, bullying someone who is weaker or they just picked on him. So argument 2 makes a stronger appeal to pathos, stirring feelings by appealing to the heart and to the head of the reader. Now, I've added a third example, And I put number 1 at the top, so again that we can compare the two of them. So the third argument here is people who eat meat are no better than sadists who torture other sentient creatures to enhance their own pleasure. Unless you enjoy sadistic tyranny over others, you have only one choice: become a vegetarian. So example 3, when we compare it to 1, also concerns pathos, but also ethos. Argument 3 appeals to the emotions through highly charged words like torture, sadist, and tyranny. Argument 3 also draws attention to the writer because many readers claim the writer's stance is very self-righteous and insulting. And this is again because of choice of words. Argument 3 seems to be too abusive to be effective in most instances, but it might work if this were a rallying speech at an animal activist convention. So how do I create ethos? Well, there's 3 ways that you can do it. So a writer creates the appeal of ethos or trust from a reader. First, be knowledgeable about your issue. So the first way to gain credibility is to be credible. Argue from a strong base of knowledge, have examples, personal experience, statistic, and other data needed to make a sound case. The second way to be credible is to be fair. Besides demonstrating one's knowledge on the issue, a writer also needs to demonstrate fairness and courtesy to alternative views. True argument can only occur when people may reasonably disagree with one another, so a writer's ethos can be strengthened when he or she demonstrates empathy and understanding of the opposition's points of view. Lastly, build a bridge to your audience. If a writer grounds his or her argument in shared values and assumptions and presents him or herself as respectful of the opposition's views, this helps to build a bridge for discussion. Now, if pathos is used effectively, it helps the readers walk in the writer's shoes. That's why arguments are improved through a use of sensory details that allows the readers to see the reality of the problem, or through stories that make specific examples and instances come alive. In order to do that, we need to use creative language, specific examples and illustrations, or to use narratives. But one caution: be careful as a writer to make sure the appeals to pathos are legitimate or become legitimate in a reader's mind. Otherwise, the appeals will confuse the reader on the issue rather than clarify them. So here's 2 examples that I'm going to read through to you again. People who prefer driving a car to taking a bus to work think that taking a bus will increase stress. Just the opposite is true. 2 weeks ago, when the barrier broke and the Mississippi River flooded the brownstone parking ramp and shut down River Drive, it caused a lot of stress. Taking a bus gives a person time to doze, read, or catch up on things. Now, if I were to revise it so that I'm going to put in some more concrete language and some specific examples, here's what I have done. I've turned it around and made it all positive about taking the bus. Taking the bus can be more relaxing than driving a car to work. Having someone else behind the wheel gives a person time to check their phone for messages, doze off, or read their Kindle instead of being frustrated trying to find a parking spot after the flooding closed down the Brown Street parking ramp and the city banned parking on 3rd Street. The second draft was revised with the specific details, about the brownstone parking ramp, banning parking on Third, which many of us probably could relate to because that impacted us. By using specific examples, then it gives the argument presence and emotional resonance because many in the room had that experience or shared it with us. Lastly, if we were to use narratives, a brief narrative, whether true or hypothetical, are effective as opening attention grabbers for an argument. Narratives can be a powerful way to evoke pathos. The narrative or story can either lead the readers into the claim or it can be the whole argument. Narratives appeal to the reader's feelings and imagination. Do not have the narratives be too private, sentimental, or dramatic because those can backfire on you. Now that you understand how different lamps and filters can shape and color a reader's perceptions of the issue, you can modulate the ethos, pathos, and logos to create the desired impact on readers for your argument.